The Force is light and full of shadows.
Before we dive in, check the link in the description if you want exclusive Timelines members-only videos you won't find on YouTube, all on our Patreon. The Jedi Council chamber sits at the peak of the High Council Tower, 1,000 meters above Coruscant's surface. 12 seats form a perfect circle. The morning light cuts through curved transparisteel windows and long pale blades. Anakin Skywalker stands at the center of that circle. 9 years old, barefoot on cold stone. He is not afraid of heights. He is afraid of the 12 pairs of eyes studying him like a wound that hasn't decided whether to heal. "Correct you were, Qui-Gon," Yoda said from his seat. The ancient master's ears tilted forward, reading something in the boy the way a farmer reads weather. Virgins in the Force this boy is. Qui-Gon Jinn stood apart from the masters, his arms folded, his expression carefully neutral. He had argued his case already. He did not argue twice. Mace Windu's gaze was a different thing entirely. Not curious, not warm. Measuring. His hands rested on the arms of his chair like a man deciding something he'd already decided. "His midichlorian count," Mace said, "exceeds Master Yoda's." The chamber didn't react. 12 Jedi Masters, and not one of them moved. Anakin kept his eyes forward. His mother had taught him that. You look at people when they talk to you. You don't look at the floor like you're ashamed of existing. He wasn't ashamed. He was terrified, which was different. Back on Tatooine, she was waiting. He'd left her there, in that shop, in the dust and the heat and the weight of Watto's ledger. He'd left her because Qui-Gon had told him this was the way to save her. Earn his freedom, earn his place here, earn enough to come back and buy her out of that life. The math was simple. Come here, become a Jedi, go back. The math required this room to say yes. "What is your age?" asked a counselor whose name Anakin didn't know. Ki Adi Mundi, pale, conical skull, eyes like a man reviewing paperwork. 9, almost 10. Almost, Mace repeated. And that single word landed with a flatness that told Anakin everything he needed to know about how much that almost counted for. Yoda's eyes closed, opened. He seemed to be listening to something no one else in the room could hear. "Afraid, are you?" Anakin's jaw tightened. "Yes." "Of what afraid are you?" The question sat in the air. He could feel it waiting, the way a test waits, not for the answer you rehearsed, but for the answer living underneath that one. "Losing my mother," he said, leaving her behind. The silence that followed was not empty. It had weight to it, texture, the kind of silence that makes a decision before the words do. Yoda opened his eyes fully. A small sound carrying enormous gravity. "Afraid to lose her. Sense much fear in you. She's a slave." The words came out harder than you meant them to. "I left her on Tatooine. She's still there." "And yet," Mace Windu leaned forward just slightly, "it is that very fear that concerns us." Anakin looked at him. "Fear," Mace continued, "is the path. You know this already. Qui-Gon has told you the code." "He has," Qui-Gon said quietly. "Fear leads to anger." Mace's voice was not unkind. It was worse than unkind. It was final. Anger to hate. Hate to suffering. "The concentration of midichlorians in your blood is extraordinary, boy. So is the concentration of fear. One does not cancel out the other." Yoda was still watching him, not with cruelty, with something that looked almost like grief. "Ready you are not," Yoda said. "Train you we will not. Decided this is." 9 years old, he'd crossed the galaxy. He'd left his mother. The math no longer worked. Anakin didn't cry. He stood in the center of that circle and felt the floor go out from under him without moving a centimeter. And he kept his eyes forward because she'd taught him to. And somewhere behind his ribs, something that had been open quietly closed. The light in the chamber changed. It was subtle at first. A flicker in the overhead panels, the kind of thing you'd attribute to a power fluctuation in the lower city. Then the windows seemed to brighten by half a grade. Then a full grade, the morning light sharpening past natural into something that cast hard shadows where there had been none. Then the sound. Deep. Below them, not an explosion, nothing so crude. A resonance, like a bell struck inside stone, traveling upward through 1,000 meters of temple foundation. Every master in the chamber was on their feet before they understood why. Yoda's eyes went wide, not with fear, with recognition. "Below," he breathed. "Something wakes. Below." The doors to the chamber didn't open. They came off their housing, both of them, simultaneously, pulled from their tracks by a force applied from the other side with total, dispassionate precision. They floated to either wall and stopped there, held in place, as if whatever had moved them found the idea of letting them clatter to the floor unnecessarily theatrical. The man who entered wore armor the color of weathered iron. A mask covered his face, not a battle mask, not a helmet with targeting systems and communication arrays. A mask shaped like a face that had decided what it thought of you before you opened your mouth. Old. Genuinely old. The kind of old that stopped being measurable in years and became geological. 12 lightsabers ignited. He didn't stop walking. He reached the center of the chamber, stopped 3 meters short of Anakin, and raised one hand, not in a fighting stance. The Force moved through the room like a pressure drop before a storm. The Masters felt it simultaneously. Not their weapons failing, but something larger and older settling over the room. A presence so consolidated that the instinct to resist it simply had nowhere to land. One by one, then together, their blades dimmed and went quiet. Their arms lowered. Not by anyone's instruction, by the weight of what had entered the room with him. Total silence. Revan stood in the center of the Jedi Council chamber and looked slowly around the circle. "I know this room," he said. His voice was low, not soft. "There is a difference. I stood in rooms like it for 10 years, and I watched the order I served make the same calculation over and over. Purity of doctrine over survival of people. I watched it lose wars it should have won. I watched it produce exactly the kind of rigid, certain blindness that the Sith know how to exploit, because the Sith are always paying attention to what the Jedi are too proud to examine." Mace Windu's jaw was set. His held lightsaber trembled, not with the weapon's energy, but with the effort of a man whose body was being held by a will that was not his own. "Who are you?" "Old enough to be honest about what I am looking at." Revan's gaze moved to Yoda. "You felt something wrong in the Force just now, Master. Not when I entered the room. Before. When you told the boy no. When the Order's reflex of self-preservation dressed itself in the language of caution and called it wisdom." Yoda did not answer. His ears were fully raised. His eyes were very still. "You sensed it," Revan said. The Force recoiled. "Because this boy standing on your floor is exactly what you teach your students the Force produces once in a generation. And your first instinct was to send him back to slavery because he knows he loves his mother." The words landed without heat. That was the thing, there was no performance in any of it. He was not trying to shame them. He was describing what he saw the way a general describes terrain. Mace's voice came out strained. "The attachment is exactly what you people have made it. A pathology instead of a resource. A weakness instead of a root." Revan finally turned away from the Masters entirely. He looked at Anakin. He did something none of the 12 had done in the 30 minutes Anakin had stood in that circle. He knelt. Not a bow. Not a performance. One knee on the stone floor, mask to face level, the way you'd speak to someone you actually wanted to talk to. "They are afraid of what they cannot categorize," Revan said. "Quiet now. Only for Anakin. They called it your fear. It isn't. It's your reason. The difference between those two things is everything." Anakin looked at the mask, at his own reflection in it, distorted, made strange. "You left someone behind," Revan said. "My mother. Then we'll get her back." A hand, extended, armored, scarred at the joints, old beyond the visible evidence of any living body in that room. Anakin looked at it for one breath. He took it. Revan stood, and Anakin stood with him, and they walked toward the open doorway. The door still held at either wall like something that had simply been moved out of the way because it was in the way. Qui-Gon Jinn watched them go. His expression did not change. But something behind his eyes shifted. Not surprise. Something closer to recognition. The specific recognition of a man who has argued for the right thing and lost, and then watched the right thing happen anyway, without him. They passed through the doorway into the corridor beyond. Below, somewhere in the temple's oldest foundations, a stasis field that had held for 4,000 years continued to dissolve, its energy dispersing harmlessly into the stone, its purpose complete. Above, in the chamber, Yoda lowered himself back into his seat, his claws wrapped around his staff. His eyes were fixed on the empty doorway. Outside the curved windows, Coruscant's endless skyline glittered in the morning light. He did not speak for a long time. Tython does not welcome visitors. It tolerates them. The wind comes off the highland plateaus in long, horizontal sheets, carrying the smell of rain that fell 3 valleys over. The ruins here predate the Coruscant Temple by 8 centuries. Stone foundations sunk so deep into the hillside that the jungle has stopped trying to reclaim them and simply grown around them. A grudging coexistence between old things. Moss fills the carved channels where irrigation once ran. Vines have threaded themselves through gaps in the archways with the patience of things that understand they will eventually win. Anakin had been here 6 weeks when Revan told him to cross the bridge. The bridge was a single stone span, 2 meters wide, arching over a drop that the morning fog made theoretical. You couldn't see the bottom, you could hear it. Water somewhere far below, indifferent. The footing is unstable on the eastern third, Revan said. He stood on the near side, arms folded, not watching Anakin cross, watching Anakin decide whether to. I can feel that, Anakin said, then cross it correctly. He crossed it. 3 stones shifted under his weight. He compensated without thinking, the force threading through his feet and ankles and knees like a conversation too fast to translate. He reached the far side and looked back. Again, Revan said, he crossed it 14 times that morning. By the 7th crossing, the unstable stones had become known variables. By the 11th, he stopped compensating consciously. By the 14th, his body had simply incorporated the bridge's flaws into its understanding of how the bridge worked. What did you just learn? Revan asked when he stepped off for the final time. Anakin thought about it honestly. That broken things have a pattern. A pause. Close. That I can work with the pattern. Closer. Anakin looked at the bridge. That the flaw isn't separate from the thing. It's part of how the thing is. Revan unfolded his arms. That is the lesson. They traveled to Leon 3 months later. Revan did not explain why until they were standing on the beach. The coastline at low tide smells of brine, and something older than brine. Volcanic rock ground fine by centuries of surf. Dark sand that holds the heat of the day long after the sun drops. The Star Forge was gone. Its destruction had left no structure, no wreckage, nothing an archaeologist could date and catalog. What remained was an atmospheric quality, a weight in the air, like a room where something significant happened and the walls remember. Revan stood at the waterline for a long time without speaking. This is where you fell, Anakin said. Not a question. This is where I ended and where I began again. Revan turned to face the water. Both things happened here. I don't separate them. Anakin sat on a piece of flat stone above the tide line. He had learned in 4 months that when Revan stood still like this, the instruction was in the stillness. You waited. I was not unlike you, Revan said. When I was young, the Order had rules I couldn't justify. I watched people die while the Council deliberated doctrine, so I acted. He paused. I was right about the problem, I was catastrophically wrong about what it justified. The surf came in and pulled back. I built an empire, Revan said, because I decided that since the existing structures had failed, I would build one that could not fail. Mine, under my control, with my certainty at the center of it. He looked at Anakin now. Do you know where that certainty came from? Anakin shook his head. Fear. Reframed so many times I couldn't recognize it anymore. Fear that if I wasn't in control, everything I cared about would be destroyed. Fear, dressed in the language of necessity, then in the language of destiny, then in the language of power so absolute that the fear underneath became invisible even to me. The weight in the air settled around them. Bastila found it, Revan said. Not because she was more powerful than I was, because she loved me without the fear. She held something up to me that wasn't a mirror. It was an open door, and I had enough left of myself to walk through it. Anakin was quiet for a moment. The Council would call that attachment. The Council would call clean water a drowning hazard. Revan moved to the flat stone and sat beside him. Your love for your mother is not a leash. Anakin, it is a compass. A Jedi without a compass is just a soldier with a sword. They said it would lead to suffering. Unexamined love can. Suppressed love absolutely does. There is a third option they never teach, because it requires admitting the second one is wrong. He looked at the boy directly. You treat love as a vow, not a secret. You examine it. You build something around it strong enough to hold the weight. And then it becomes the thing that holds you together instead of the thing that pulls you apart. Anakin looked at the dark sand. I still dream about her. Good, Revan said. Hold on to that. We'll need it. The dual-saber training began on the plateau above the ruins. 4 months into Tython, in the middle of a rainstorm Revan had not seen fit to wait out. 2 blades is not twice the offense, Revan said, standing in the rain with his saber lit in his right hand, waiting. It is 2 simultaneous conversations. One blade asks the question. The other waits for the answer. Anakin ignited both. His left hand felt wrong with a hilt in it. Imbalanced, too busy, like trying to write 2 sentences at the same time. They feel like they're fighting each other, he said. They are. Let them. He did. For 20 minutes they were fighting each other, and fighting Revan was secondary and impossible. His left blade caught 3 parries that should have been openings. His right blade overcommitted, chasing the correction. He took a training strike to the ribs that would have been a wound in the field, and he took it because he was managing his own hands instead of reading his opponent. "Stop," Revan said. He deactivated his own blade. "What are you doing with your left hand?" "Defending. You're controlling it. Those are different things." Revan stepped in close, took Anakin's left wrist, moved it into a low guard position without force or instruction, just placement. "This blade doesn't think, you're trying to think for it. Stop." "Then what do I do?" "Trust what you've built. The 14 crossings on the bridge, your body didn't debate the unstable stones. It knew them. Your left blade already knows where the threat is. Your job is to not get in its way." Anakin stood still in the rain. He felt ridiculous. He also felt, somewhere below ridiculous, the faint outline of something the instruction was pointing at. He ignited both blades again. Revan attacked, without warning. The first exchange Anakin lost. The second he survived. By the fourth he wasn't thinking about his left hand at all. And the moment he realized he wasn't thinking about it, he almost lost the thread. And then he stopped realizing things and just moved. Revan disengaged. Stood back. "There," he said. Anakin was breathing hard. The rain ran down his face and off the hilts in his hands. He looked at his left hand. "One blade is discipline," Revan said. "One is passion. They're not at war. They're in conversation. When you stop trying to control the conversation and let it happen, you get something neither one produces alone." By the end of the first year, Anakin could hold a Soresu shell under direct assault from Revan for 40 seconds. He could extend his force sense beyond a kilometer of complex terrain. He could suppress his own force signature well enough to pass a council knight in a corridor without triggering their awareness, a skill Revan described only as useful. The deeper lessons were smaller, Revan pointing at a cliff face and saying, "The force is not an amplifier. It is a relationship. You bring your half. It brings its half. Treat it like a tool and it gives you a tool's yield." Revan waking him before dawn to meditate not into silence but into clarity. The difference being that silence empties and clarity organizes. "What are you afraid of today? Name it. Don't move away from it." Revan, late one evening at the Leon campfire, not speaking at all, just sitting with the history of that beach around them, teaching something that had no language yet. Anakin learned it anyway. The night before they left for Tatooine, he sat outside the camp and watched the stars. He knew exactly which cluster contained his son. He found it in under 4 seconds. He had been finding it in 4 seconds since he was 3 years old, standing outside Watto's shop in the dark, confirming the universe had placed him correctly within it, even if everything inside it was wrong. He found it now. He thought about his mother's hands, the specific weight of them on his shoulders, what she smelled like, the sounds she made when she laughed at something that genuinely surprised her. He held all of it. He didn't flinch from any of it. In the morning, he shouldered his pack and went to find Revan. "Now?" he asked. "Now," Revan said. "Tatooine from the air is the color of an old bone. The twin suns hit the desert at an angle that eliminates shadow for most of the day, flattening the landscape into something that looks simple until you're inside it. And then the heat finds every gap in your clothing, and the sand finds every gap in your gear, and the wind carries both of them into places you didn't know you had. Mos Espa sprawls below like something that spilled and dried. Adobe walls the color of the ground they're built on. Market stalls with awnings, sun-bleached past their original colors, into a universal beige. Anakin had not been back in a year. He knew the smell before they landed. Hot metal and animal dung and something faintly sweet from the fruit stalls near the slave quarters' eastern entrance. He knew the particular quality of the light in the mid-morning, how it came off the dome rooftops in a white that made you squint even behind eye protection. He walked through the market without looking at it. Revan moved beside him at the same pace, unhurried, the iron-colored armor drawing looks that slid off him because the alternative, holding the look, meeting whatever was behind the mask, was too costly. People in Mos Espa had learned a long time ago to assess threats and move on. An armed man in unusual armor registered, was catalogued as expensive trouble, and was left alone. This took most people 3 seconds. Watto's shop sat at the end of a crooked lane off the main drag, its entrance half blocked by a gondola speeder, with a cracked stabilizer fin that had been there the last time Anakin visited and apparently had not moved. Revan walked through the door first. The Toydarian was behind his counter, rifling through a bin of motivator housings with the focused irritation of a man who has lost something small. He looked up, registered the armor. His wings beat twice, lifting him 6 inches off the ground in the instinctive hovering that Toydarians defaulted to when uncertain whether to retreat or negotiate. Not open for, Revan looked at him. Not a force technique. Not yet. Just the look, the mask's empty regard, patient and total, the look of something that has been waiting 4,000 years and finds the concept of being inconvenienced genuinely foreign. Watto's wings slowed. "We are here for Shmi Skywalker," Revan said. "Her chip will be disabled, her debt will be settled. You will process the documentation that makes her a free citizen of the Republic before we leave the shop. Now wait just a—" The motivator housing Watto had been holding lifted from his hand and drifted to the counter. Everything else on the shelves stayed exactly where it was. The selective precision of it was worse than a display of raw power would have been. It said, "I am not demonstrating capability. I am demonstrating patience, which is running out." Watto's compound eyes moved between Revan and Anakin. He landed on Anakin. Recognition moved across the Toydarian's face, then calculation, then something that might have been, in a creature with more self-awareness, shame. "Ani," he said. "The documentation," Anakin said. The chip took Revan 4 minutes. He placed 2 fingers at the base of Shmi's collarbone, the slave chip's location. Subcutaneous, below the left clavicle, standard Hut contracted hardware. Revan's hand moved to it without instruments. Anakin felt the force extend from him in a frequency so precise it had an almost surgical quality, a targeted thread rather than a wave. And when it withdrew, the chip was cold and inert inside the housing of scar tissue that had grown around it over 9 years. The documentation was signed 12 minutes after they entered the shop. They found her in the slave quarter, 3 blocks east, in a small courtyard where the morning shade still held. She was carrying a water container from the communal cistern when Anakin came around the corner. She stopped. He stopped. The container hit the ground and she crossed the distance between them in 4 steps, and her arms were around him before he'd finished processing that she was real and present, and not the version of her that lived in his chest, as a sustained low-grade ache he'd learned to work around. She was smaller than he remembered, or he was larger. Probably both. Her hands went to his face. She looked at him the way people look at something returned from a place they were not sure allowed returns. "You're different," she said. "Yes." Her thumbs moved along his jaw, measuring. Not afraid of what she found. Reading it. The way she'd always read him. The way she used to read his moods off his posture, from across Watto's shop floor when he was too young to know he was broadcasting them. "You're not angry," she said, the observation precise and soft and slightly wondering. "No. I thought—" She stopped, her eyes filled. Not with grief, with something going out of her that had been held too long under pressure. "I thought the worst thing that could happen to you out there was that something would happen that made you angry and there'd be no one to hold the—" "There was someone," Anakin said. He felt Revan's presence at the courtyard entrance behind him and did not turn. Shmi looked past his shoulder. Whatever she saw in Revan's stillness, the armor, the mask, the absolute absence of performance, registered on her face as something she was taking very seriously. "Who are you?" she asked. "Someone who found him before the anger found him," Revan said. "And someone who would like to offer you a choice about what comes next." The Hutt enforcers came at midday, 3 of them. Gamorreans on loan from a minor lieutenant of Jabba's household, sent to clarify the terms of Watto's sudden paperwork on behalf of interests who had not been consulted. They were large, and they were armed, and they had the focused simplicity of beings who had resolved most of life's complexity into a single workable question: can I hit it? Or can't I? They decided they could. The first one through the alley entrance swung a vibro-axe at Revan's back, with the confidence of a man who had never seen what happens to vibro-axes near people who know they're coming. Revan stepped sideways without turning. The axe traveled the length of its arc, through empty air, and the Gamorrean's momentum carried him 2 steps past where his target had been. Revan's elbow found the junction of neck and shoulder at the end of that step, with the precise, unhurried economy of something that has done this 10,000 times, and finds it neither exciting nor difficult. The Gamorrean sat down in the dust and did not get up. The second one stopped, reconsidered. The third raised a blaster. Anakin's blade was lit before the power cell charged, not in defense of himself. He stepped between the blaster and his mother, who had not moved from the doorway behind him, and held the saber in the low guard Revan had placed him in during the rain on that Tython plateau. Waiting, not threatening, a distinction that was entirely real to him now. The third Gamorrean fired twice. 2 bolts. Anakin redirected the first into the ground, 3 feet to the shooter's left. Not at him. Into the ground. The second he stopped in the air between them, held in the blade's field for a half-second, and let fall. The third Gamorrean set down his blaster and walked away with the specific gait of a creature reassigning this problem to someone else. The second one followed. The first one was still sitting in the dust. Anakin deactivated his blade. His hands were steady. His pulse was elevated, and he could feel that clearly. Elevated, not spiking. Acknowledged, not commanding. He turned to check his mother. She was standing in the doorway with her hands clasped in front of her, watching him. The same expression as before, still reading. "You could have hit him," she said. "The one with the blaster, yes, but you didn't. He wasn't trying to kill anyone. He was doing a job badly." Anakin looked at his saber. "There's a difference." Shmi was quiet for a moment. Then she crossed the courtyard and took his face in her hands again, briefly, and pressed her forehead to his. "Yes," she said, "there is." They arranged passage to Naboo by evening. Revan's contacts, a network Anakin had learned not to ask too much about, produced a ship, a route, and documentation that would establish Shmi as a Republic citizen arriving under humanitarian relocation provisions. No Hutt jurisdiction, no outstanding claims. On the transport, after his mother had fallen asleep in the cabin behind them, Anakin sat across from Revan in the small forward bay and looked at the stars moving past. "She asked if I was angry," he said. "I heard. She was afraid that something would happen and there'd be no one to—" He stopped, found the word, to hold the shape of me. Revan looked at him. "She was right to be afraid," Anakin said. "Not with bitterness, with the clear earned recognition of someone who has stood close enough to a thing to understand what it would have cost. The Tuskens. If she'd died and I hadn't, if I'd come back here without you and found her—" He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. "Real justice requires action," Revan said. "It also requires that the action be yours, not the fears." Outside the viewport, Tatooine shrank to a pale point in the dark between its suns. Then it was gone. The Senate district at evening looks like ambition made architectural. Every surface catches the last light differently. The polished durasteel of the administrative towers holding it longest, the transparasteel of the senatorial pods throwing it back in fractured angles, the hover lanes between buildings carrying streams of traffic that from altitude look deliberate and choreographed, and from inside feel like controlled chaos, held together by custom and mutual self-interest. The Republic's capital at dusk, the most powerful city in the known galaxy, arranged to look exactly like what it believed itself to be. Senator Bail Organa's aide was 23 years old and had worked in the district for 8 months, and thought she had developed a functional immunity to being impressed. She had not accounted for Anakin Skywalker. He came through the main corridor of the Senate office building at a pace that was not hurried and not slow. The pace of someone who knows where they are going and has decided that the architecture is welcome to arrange itself accordingly. The armored robes were dark, fitted without being martial, practical without being plain. 2 lightsaber hilts at his belt, one blue-white, and one a deep violet that caught the overhead lighting differently depending on the angle. His face, she put him at 19, maybe 20, carried an expression she needed 3 seconds to classify. Not arrogance, not the performed confidence of the senatorial aides who'd learned to walk like they mattered. Something quieter than that. Something that didn't need the room to confirm it. She found Revan harder to look at directly, not because of the mask, though the mask contributed, but because of what came off him in the Force, which she did not have and could not name, but which every non-Force sensitive in the corridor registered as an instruction to find somewhere else to be. They had been requested here, requested by the Chancellor himself, through channels that were technically standard and practically unprecedented. The letter had arrived on Senate letterhead, handwritten at the bottom in a script that was elegant to the point of affectation. "I have long wished to meet the men history has decided to revive. P.S. Palpatine's private reception room was not the office. The office was public theater. The desk, the Coruscant view, the careful arrangement of a man who wanted visitors to feel simultaneously welcomed and aware of the distance between themselves and the chair. This room was smaller, warmer. Bookshelves of actual physical volumes, a detail curated with precision. A low table set with tea that no one had been asked if they wanted. He was standing when they entered. Not behind anything. An old man in formal robes, his hands folded in front of him, his face arranged into the expression that had worked on every person who had ever sat in those chairs. A kind of luminous, tired benevolence, as if the burden of caring so much about the Republic had aged him prematurely, and he had decided to bear it gracefully. "Anakin," he said warmly, as if they'd met before. They hadn't. "I feel I know you already. The HoloNet has been quite thorough, Chancellor, Anakin said. Palpatine's gaze moved to Revan. The warmth didn't leave his face. It simply became technically inaccurate. And you, he said. I confess the histories were somewhat thin on what to expect from you in person. They usually are, Revan said. They sat. Palpatine poured tea with the ease of a man performing domesticity so long it had become genuine. He asked about Outer Rim conditions. He asked about the humanitarian operations. 7 of them in the past 2 years. Documented, each one technically outside Republic jurisdiction, and each one leaving behind conditions notably better than the Republic's own interventions in adjacent sectors had managed. He framed it as admiration. He was very good at framing things as admiration. Anakin answered directly, neither elaborating nor deflecting. The Revanite pattern, learned through 2 years of Revan answering exactly the question asked, and no adjacent ones. Yes. No. This is what we found. This is what we did. He watched Palpatine listen and was aware, without naming it yet, that the listening had a quality to it like a hand feeling a wall for structural weaknesses. You must find it, Palpatine said, setting down his cup, somewhat constraining. Operating without Senate oversight, without the recognition that your work clearly merits. No, Anakin said. A small pause. No. Recognition from bodies with competing interests is a liability more than an asset. We do the work. The outcomes are documented. Anyone who needs to verify them can. Palpatine smiled. It reached his eyes at the correct speed, held for the correct duration. How refreshingly uncomplicated. He turned the smile toward Revan. And you, Master, forgive me, I am uncertain of the correct form of address. You have shaped this in him, this admirable clarity. He shaped it himself, Revan said. I provided the conditions. Modest, accurate. The warmth in Palpatine's face accepted this without flagging it. He leaned back, the posture of a man relaxing into candor. I wonder, he said, and forgive an old man's curiosity, do you never feel the isolation of your position? 2 men, operating outside any institutional framework, however righteous the cause, without anyone who truly understands what you carry? The question was aimed at Anakin. It was constructed with precision. Isolation, righteous cause, no one who understands. 3 hooks in a single sentence. The kind of sentence that only sounds like sympathy. Anakin looked at him. I have my master, he said. I have my mother. I have people I trust. A small pause, completely without performance. Do you find the position isolating, Chancellor? The Senate is a large institution, and I imagine there are very few people in it you actually trust. Something moved across Palpatine's face. Not the warmth leaving. The warmth was architectural, load-bearing. It didn't leave. Something underneath. It shifted. A micro-adjustment. A recalibration. A pause that was 3/10 of a second longer than pauses in this man's conversations were ever allowed to be. Ha, he said, warmly, with the laugh of a man delighted by unexpected wit. Quite right. Quite right. He refilled the tea. The conversation lasted 40 minutes. Palpatine touched on the separatist movement's rhetoric, troubling the legitimate grievances being exploited by cynical actors. He touched on the Jedi Council's recent statements regarding independent Force users. I, of course, have great respect for the Order, though one understands your own complicated history with them. He did not at any point say anything that could be quoted out of context as manipulation. He was. Anakin reflected on the way out, extraordinarily careful. Revan said nothing until they were in the speeder, the Senate building receding behind them into the grid of lights. Well, Anakin said, you noticed the pause. After I mentioned trust. Yes. Anakin looked at the city. He was testing something. Each question was, he was looking for a gap, something to put pressure on. And when he couldn't find one, he recalibrated, filed it away. Anakin turned from the window. He's not finished. He just knows the first approach doesn't work. Revan's hands rested on his knees. What did he remind you of? Anakin thought about it honestly the way he'd been taught to think about things. The bridge, he said finally. The unstable stones. He was feeling for which ones shift. Yes, Revan said. He's done this to other people. Many, and it worked. Every time, Revan said, until tonight. In the reception room after the speeder's running lights had disappeared into the hover lane traffic, Palpatine stood at the window. Sly Moore waited near the door with the patience of someone paid to be invisible and very good at it. He did not move for a long time. The warmth was entirely gone now, not replaced by anything dramatic, not by visible fury or theatrical menace. What was underneath the warmth was simply different in quality. Older, colder, the temperature of something that has survived by treating every obstacle as a problem of time and information rather than force. The boy was armored, not the lightsaber, not the robes. Something underneath those. A framework of genuine security that had no gap in it that Palpatine could identify in 40 minutes of careful pressure, which meant either the gap was very small and very well hidden, or the gap did not yet exist. The man in the mask was something else entirely. He had looked at Palpatine across that table the way you look at a card trick when you already know where the coin is. No performance of ignorance, no courtesy pretense that the game was subtle. 2 is such a small number for a galaxy this large, Chancellor. He had not said it. But the mask's regard across the table had said something structurally equivalent, and Palpatine had felt it land with the precise weight of a thing that knew exactly what it weighed. He turned from the window. "Increase the surveillance on the Skywalker woman," he said. "Naboo. Discreet. A pause. And pull everything we have on Revan, not the Republic archives, the Sith archives, the deep records." Sly Moore inclined her head and was gone. Palpatine looked at the low table, the teacups, the careful domestic arrangement of a room designed to make people feel they were talking to a man rather than an office. The smile that crossed his face now had nothing warm in it at all. He would find the stone that shifted. He simply needed more time. Kamino exists in a state of permanent disagreement with the sky. The ocean here has no coastline. It simply stops being water and becomes atmosphere somewhere above the platform cities. The transition marked by nothing except the change in what the wind is carrying. Rain on Kamino is not weather. It is condition. It falls horizontally, vertically, in directions that require new vocabulary, driven by storm systems that have been cycling over this world since before the Republic had a name for it. The Kaminoans built upward because the surface is a theoretical concept and downward is the ocean's jurisdiction. Tipoca City rises from the waves on stilts the width of starship hulls. From above, in the gray-white nothing of the cloud layer, its dome clusters appear and disappear depending on what the storm is doing. From inside, behind the curved white walls and the climate-controlled corridors, the sound of the rain is a constant low percussion that the Kaminoans have long since stopped hearing. Revan heard it. He stood at the observation window of the central cloning bay and looked at the ranks of development tanks stretching the length of the hall below, hundreds of them, each containing a body at some stage of accelerated growth, each body running on the same genetic template, each template expressing itself through the same precise biological modifications that produced soldiers rather than men. The lights in the tanks were blue-white, clinical. The combined glow of them made the hall look like something that had not decided yet whether it was a laboratory or a tomb. Lama Su stood beside him with the attentive serenity of a host who has given this tour many times and found it consistently impressive. 200,000 units currently in production, Lama Su said. Growth acceleration at twice the natural rate. Combat conditioning from early developmental stages. They are, without qualification, the finest soldiers the Republic will ever field. I don't doubt that, Revan said. Anakin was 3 corridors away, deep in a secondary processing bay where the biochip installation equipment lived behind panels that were technically maintenance access and practically invisible to anyone who wasn't looking. He'd been looking since they landed. The chip architecture had bothered him from the first briefing document. He'd read the Kaminoan technical specifications aboard the transport. The official version, the one Lama Su had provided to the Republic Procurement Office, and the discrepancy had been there in the footnotes, expressed in language so specialized it would pass a civilian audit without flagging. A secondary behavioral modification layer in the inhibitor chip design. Framed as aggression suppression technology, calibrated, according to the footnote, to respond to a classified executive command sequence. He pulled the panel. The installation array was a row of 12 units, each one cycling through a chip programming sequence at intervals corresponding to the development stage of the clone batch it was processing. Anakin crouched in front of the nearest unit and extended his awareness into its architecture, the way Revan had taught him to extend awareness into unstable stone. Not forcing, not demanding, just listening to what the structure wanted to tell him about itself. What it told him was worse than the footnote. The command sequence wasn't aggression suppression. The aggression suppression layer was real, and it was functional, and it was also a cover. Underneath it, in a partition of the chip's memory that the official schematics did not document, was a targeting protocol. Specific, clean. Not a berserker trigger, not something that would produce visible dramatic malfunction. Something subtle, something that, when activated, would redirect the clone's loyalty hierarchy from his unit, his brothers, his officer, upward through the chain to a single executive command point. Override everything. Execute specific targets. Do it without hesitation, without question, without the possibility of the individual soldier making a different choice. Anakin sat with that for a moment. He thought about the development tanks in the hall above, the blue-white light, the bodies in various stages of becoming men who would never know this was in them. He pulled his calm. Revan arrived in 4 minutes. He stood behind Anakin and looked at the installation array and said nothing while Anakin walked him through it. The partition, the targeting protocol, the command architecture. Order 66, Revan said. That's what it executes? That is what it will be called. He crouched beside the array. I have seen this mechanism before. Not this technology. The technology is new. The mechanism is ancient. Every Sith Lord who has ever commanded armies has needed a failsafe against the armies being turned. This is a more elegant version of a very old problem solution. Anakin looked at the rows of installation units. 200,000 chips, programmed, already in soldiers in the field, and more being installed in every clone that comes out of these tanks. The rain against the facility hull was a low, continuous sound. A Kaminoan technician passed the corridor entrance 40 meters away, head down, focused on a datapad, oblivious. Can it be undone? Anakin said. Not a question. A statement shaped like one. Revan's hand moved to the nearest installation unit. He did not touch it yet. The chips and soldiers already deployed are surgical problems, each one individually. We will need time and access we don't currently have. He looked at Anakin. But the source is here. The programming architecture lives in these units. Every chip installed from this moment forward is programmed from these templates. So we changed the template. It took 6 hours. Revan worked the metaphysical layer, the thing Anakin still had no clean language for. The ancient practice that operated at the intersection of force sensitivity and biological architecture. He described it once, early in the second year on Tython, as listening to the language a living system uses to talk to itself, and then inserting a word it would recognize as its own. It was not alchemy in the theatrical sense. It was more like translation, finding the point at which a chip's mechanical command structure interfaced with the force sensitivity latent in every living body it was implanted in, and altering what the interface said. Anakin worked the technical layer. He had grown up rebuilding droids from components that had no reason to work together, making them work together through the combination of mechanical understanding and force-guided intuition that Revan had spent 2 years sharpening into something precise. The chip architecture, once he understood what it was trying to do, was not complicated. It was clever, and it was hidden, and it was designed to be invisible to the people it would eventually be used against. But its cleverness was the cleverness of concealment, not of genuine complexity. And Anakin was very good at finding the structural logic underneath concealment. He changed 3 things in the command hierarchy. The executive override trigger, the classified sequence that would activate Order 66, he left structurally intact and redirected to a null response. Not deleted. Deletion would be detectable, would flag an audit. Redirected. The command sequence, when transmitted, would now produce nothing at all. A switch connected to a wire leading to an empty room. The loyalty hierarchy above unit and officer, he restructured. Not to himself, not to Revan. He rebuilt it around the clones themselves. A closed loop of mutual loyalty with no external executive point, no single node that could be captured and used to redirect the whole system. Brothers to brothers to brothers, with the chain ending there. It was, he reflected, what the loyalty had probably been in the field anyway, underneath the chip's architecture. He was just making official what the clones had already decided on their own. By the 4th hour, a Kaminoan administrator made a circuit of the secondary bays. Revan felt her approach 40 seconds before she reached the corridor. He was on his feet and at the main bay entrance, filling the doorway with the specific quality of presence that said, "This area has been addressed," before she turned the corner. She stopped, looked up at the mask. "This corridor is restricted to certified Republic. We are conducting an audit on behalf of the Senate Military Oversight Committee," Revan said. "The committee's authorization codes were transmitted to your facility director this morning. If there is a discrepancy in your records, I suggest addressing it with him rather than with me." There were no authorization codes. There was no audit. There was, however, a facility director who was currently occupied with Lama Su's tour schedule, and there was the mask, and there was the 45 seconds of uncertainty the administrator needed to process both of those facts, before deciding that the risk calculus favored making a note and moving on. She moved on. Anakin looked up from the installation array. "That won't hold. It doesn't need to. We have 30 minutes. Revan came back to the array. Finish the loyalty restructure. They were in the air before the facility shift change. The storm hit them on the way out of the atmosphere. Genuine turbulence, the kind that required actual piloting rather than force guidance. Anakin handled it without discussion, reading the weather systems the way he'd read the bridge, and the unstable stones, and the chip architecture, the way he read everything now, which was by listening first. When they cleared the cloud layer and the stars appeared above, and Kamino's permanent storm receded below them into a white-gray ceiling, Revan looked at the navigation console for a long moment. His failsafe, Anakin said. Gone. He doesn't know yet. No, Revan said. He doesn't. The ship moved into hyperspace. Behind them, in the secondary processing bay, 12 installation units cycled through their programming sequences in the blue-white light of the cloning hull, each one now producing chips, with a loyalty architecture that had no executive override and no targeting protocol and no classified command sequence buried in a partition the official schematics didn't document. Just soldiers, just men. Each one now belonging, when the time came, only to themselves. Mandalore at night smells of forge smoke and cold stone. The capital, Sundari, rises from the desert in white durasteel domes that the Mandalorians did not build and do not particularly love. The architecture of a pacifist government installed after the last civil war, clean and geometric, and entirely without the quality that Mandalorian construction has always prioritized above aesthetics, permanence through endurance. The old clan halls survive in the outer districts, below the dome's climate envelope, in the desert wind, stone and timber and heat-treated iron, built to last through things that would end the buildings around them. Revan and Anakin had been in the city for 6 hours before anyone agreed to meet them. The message had gone out through channels that Revan described only as old. 3 days of silence, then a location and a time, and a single line of Mando that Anakin's translation software rendered as, "Come without deception, or don't come." They came without deception. The hall was in the outer district, 200 meters past the dome's edge, where the desert wind came through the gaps in the stone construction with a sound like breathing. Inside, firelight from a central pit threw long shadows up the walls. The ceiling was hung with banners that had been repaired so many times their original colors were now suggestions rather than facts. Weapons on every wall, not displayed, maintained. The difference was visible if you knew what to look at. 40 Mandalorians. They were not standing at attention. They were sitting, leaning, occupying the hall with the specific relaxation of people who are completely prepared and choose not to perform preparedness. Every one of them tracked Revan and Anakin from the moment they crossed the threshold, not with hostility, with assessment. The same look the bridge had given Anakin's feet on the 14th crossing, measuring categorical, interested in the result. At the hall's far end, in a chair that was not a throne but occupied the position one would occupy, sat a woman with close-cropped gray hair and the face of someone who has made a significant number of permanent decisions. Clan Chief Vera Sur, 62 years old, 3 wars. A scar from jaw to temple on the left side that she had by all accounts never explained to anyone who hadn't been there. She looked at Revan's mask for a long time. The old histories named that armor, she said. Her basic carried the deliberate cadence of someone who speaks 3 languages and chooses which one to use with care. I have seen drawings of it. In texts that predate this dome, this government, and every pacifist who ever told my people we were too violent to govern ourselves. The armor is accurate to the drawings, Revan said. So I see. She stood. Not with ceremony, with the functional movement of someone for whom standing is a practical act. Anyone can wear old armor. Walk with me. The verification chamber was behind the hall, smaller, lit by a single overhead fixture that threw clean white light onto a stone table. On the table, a holocron, not Jedi, not Sith, older than both institutions. Its casing was Mandalorian iron, its activation mechanism a bloodline key that Vera Sur produced from a chain at her neck. It opened into a figure, compressed, projected, the grain of old recording technology making the edges soft. A Mandalorian warrior, female, in armor that matched certain elements of the wall drawings in the hall outside. She spoke in archaic Mando, and the only word Anakin's translation software caught with certainty was a name. Revan. The recording was 6 minutes long. When it ended, Vera Sur looked at Revan's mask with the expression of a woman cross-referencing 2 documents and finding them consistent. This account was recorded by my ancestor 7 generations back, she said. She served under you at Malachor V. She described your mask in terms I will not repeat in translation, because they lose the weight. She folded her hands on the table. She also described what happened after the war, what you became, what you chose afterward when you could have kept the Empire. And, Revan said, she approved. Vera Sur looked at him steadily. She said a man who conquers an empire and then puts it down is either very stupid or very honest. She did not think you were stupid. She was correct on both counts. The clan chief's mouth moved in something that was not quite a smile, but was in the same family. The mask is authentic. You are who the recordings say you are. She looked at Anakin. And this one, mine, Revan said. The word carrying a specific weight, not possessive, not hierarchical. Something closer to the way you'd describe a responsibility you'd chosen. Vera Sur looked at Anakin for a long time. He met it without performance, the way he'd been taught to meet assessment. Fully present, not managing the impression he was making, just there. He's young, she said. He was younger when it mattered more, Revan said. The trial was Anakin's. Vera Sur announced it without preamble, returning to the main hall, speaking in Mando that the room understood before Anakin's translation caught up. A younger warrior detached from the group near the eastern wall, male, mid-20s, with the build of someone who trains because he finds idleness physically painful. His name, the translation rendered, was Kale. He was the third best fighter in the hall, which Vera Sur said not as a compliment to Anakin but as information about the trial's terms. No sabers. Clan floor rules, first to yield or fall. Anakin unclipped both hilts and handed them to Revan without being asked. Kale moved well. No wasted motion, no performance in it, the same quality the hall had, completely prepared without performing preparedness. He closed the distance fast, testing reach first with a strike that was also a probe, reading how Anakin's weight distributed when he stepped back. Anakin didn't step back. He absorbed the strike's energy into a redirect, not a block. The distinction Revan had spent 2 years drilling into him. The difference between meeting force with force and giving force somewhere to go that wasn't through you. Kale's momentum carried him a half-step past center. Anakin's counter was 2 moves compressed into the time one usually took. Kale reset. Faster now. The probing was done. What followed was not elegant. It was not meant to be. Mandalorian combat floor rules produce a specific kind of exchange. Close, grinding, attrition-based, designed to find what you do when the clean techniques run out and you're working in the space between them. Kale was very good in that space. He had been building calluses in it, figuratively and literally, since he was old enough to stand. Anakin was better. Not because of force sensitivity, he kept it at the baseline, present but passive, not amplifying, because of the bridge. Because of 14 crossings and the understanding that broken things have patterns and patterns can be learned, and once learned, they stop being obstacles and become information. Kale's patterns were readable by the third exchange, and readable meant workable. And workable meant that what looked from the outside like improvisation was actually the application of something that had been building for 3 years in ruins, and rainstorms and training bouts, where losing meant a strike that would have killed him in the field. He put Kale on the ground in the 7th exchange, not with force, with a redirect so precisely timed that Kale's own momentum did most of the work, and the pressure Anakin applied at the end of it was almost courteous. Kale stayed down for 2 seconds, looked up, made a sound that the translation rendered as genuine, unperformed appreciation. The hall was quiet. Then a Mandalorian near the far wall struck his bracer against the stone column beside him, a single sharp crack. 2 others followed, then more, until the rhythm of it filled the hall. Irregular and overlapping, not applause but acknowledgement, a different thing. Vera Sur was looking at Anakin with the expression she'd previously reserved for the holocron. "He'll do," she said to Revan. "He did 3 years ago," Revan said. "I've just been letting it develop." They spent 4 days in the hall. The strategic logic unfolded through long conversations around the fire pit, with maps and Mandalorian tactical histories, and Revan's own experience commanding forces across campaigns that predated every military doctrine currently in use in the Republic. The third faction's terms were, Revan stated simply, no Republic command structure, no separatist affiliation, no political objective beyond civilian protection in active conflict zones, independent, accountable to outcomes, not to institutions. The debate was real. 2 clan representatives pushed back on the civilian protection framing as insufficiently Mandalorian, too defensive, too reactive, not enough personal honor in it. Anakin answered them without Revan's help. He talked about Mos Espa, about what controlled, purposeful action produces that blind aggression never does, about the difference between a fight won and a fight justified. The younger warriors in the room listened to him more than they listened to the clan representatives. Verisur noticed. On the fourth evening she came to where Anakin sat alone near the hall's eastern wall and lowered herself onto the bench beside him with the economy of someone whose joints have opinions about low seating. "You know what you're building," she said. "I know what we're building." She shook her head. "Revan is the foundation. You are the reason people will follow it." She looked at the fire. "The foundation doesn't need to be loved. You do, and you are." A pause. "That is not a small thing." Anakin looked at the fire for a long time. "My master would say it's a responsibility," he said. "Your master," Verisur said, "would be right." The vanguard mobilized on the fifth morning. 40 clan warriors from Sundari, with commitments from 3 allied clans in the outer settlements, bringing the total to 112. Beskar armor, personal weapons, 6 gunships that the pacifist government technically didn't know existed. Not an army, a precision instrument. Revan stood at the hall's entrance as the warriors moved past him toward the landing pads, and watched the organized efficiency of it, with an expression Anakin couldn't read through the mask, and had stopped trying to. "You've done this before," Anakin said. "I have built armies," Revan said. "I have not always built them for the right reasons." He watched the last of the gunships being prepped in the gray morning light. "This time the reason is correct. That changes how it feels." "How does it feel?" A pause. "Like something that might last," Revan said. The first gunship lifted. "The city of Naus 3 has no military value. That is precisely why the Separatist battle group chose it. 40,000 civilians, a modest spaceport, grain processing facilities that supply 6 agricultural systems in the mid-rim. No strategic infrastructure. No Republic garrison. Nothing that would justify the Senate committing clone battalions to its defense before the ground assault had already finished its work. The Separatist command doctrine in the third year of the war had refined itself into something efficient, and without sentiment, find the places the Republic calculates are not worth defending. Apply force there. Accumulate leverage through the suffering of people who are not worth defending until leverage becomes negotiating position. The battle group arrived at 0300 local time. 42 droid infantry carriers, 6 armored ground units, air support sufficient to hold the sky against anything the planetary defense force could put up, which was not much. By 0400 they held the spaceport. By 0430 the grain facilities were occupied and the civilian evacuation routes east of the city center had been systematically blocked. By 0500 the vanguard arrived. Revan's force resonance was not a visible thing. It produced no light, no sound, no physical manifestation that a sensor array could have categorized. What it produced was a quality of shared awareness in the forces it touched, a sustained outward extension of perception, broadcast through the force the way a signal moves through a receiver, each allied fighter catching the edge of it and finding their situational understanding suddenly sharper than their instruments alone accounted for. It was a technique Bastila had described to him once, in the years before the events that separated them, as something she could do that he could not. And he had listened the way he listened to everything she told him about her own capabilities, which was carefully and with the specific attention of a man filing things away. He had spent the intervening centuries finding his own partial version of it, not what she had, a narrower thing. Enough. Mandalorian gunships made approach decisions with an unusual coherence, each pilot reading the same gaps in the droid air cover without comm traffic to coordinate them. Clone units embedded with the vanguard, 40 of them, volunteers, operating outside Republic chain of command, moved through the city's street grid with a spatial awareness of each other's positions that exceeded what their helmet sensors could account for. Revan sat in the lead gunship with his eyes open and his hands quiet on his knees, the resonance extending outward from him like heat from a source too steady to flicker. Anakin led the ground insertion. He came in fast and low over the eastern district, the 2 gunships behind him dropping to street level before the droid air support had finished processing the new contacts. The first droid unit was a line of B-2 super battle droids covering the main evacuation route, 12 of them in staggered formation, their targeting systems cycling through the approaching gunships with the methodical confidence of units that had not yet updated their threat assessment to include the masked figure dropping from the lead ship's side hatch, 20 meters above the street. Anakin landed between them. Both blades came up, not to attack, to pull the targeting priority. Every droid in the line swung toward the nearest threat, which was him, which meant their backs were to the gunship ramps coming down behind them. The Mandalorians came off the ramps firing. It lasted 11 seconds. The B-2 units were durable and their threat assessment was fast, but fast wasn't fast enough to handle priorities shifting twice inside a single engagement window. Anakin moved through them while they were still recalculating. Not the theatrical arc of an action sequence, but something tighter and more functional, each movement with a clear objective, the blades describing lines that ended on specific targets rather than the general direction of enemies. The evacuation route opened. He was already moving to the next block. Count Dooku arrived at 0620. His solar sailor descended through the controlled airspace the Separatist battle group had established, with the ease of a man visiting a property he owns. He landed in the city center's main plaza, where a tactical command post had been established in the shadow of the administrative building, and he stepped from the ramp with his cape arranged precisely and his hands clasped behind his back, and the expression of a man who has been inconvenienced by something he fully intends to address. The tactical commander, a Neimoidian with the look of someone for whom this morning had already exceeded the stress parameters of the job, briefed him in under 2 minutes. Dooku listened without interrupting. When the briefing was finished, he asked 2 questions. The first was about the coordinated movement of the vanguard units, the quality of their synchronization. The second was about the young man with 2 sabers who had opened the eastern evacuation route. The Neimoidian answered both questions. Dooku turned to look east, toward the sounds of the ongoing engagement. A jumped-up slave boy playing knight, he said, to no one in particular. How extraordinary that anyone let it get this far. He descended the plaza steps toward the sound. They met in the grain processing district, between 2 storage towers that rose 40 meters above the street, and created a natural channel of shadow, even at mid-morning. Dooku came around the southern tower and stopped when he saw Anakin standing in the space between them. He looked at the 2 sabers, at the robes, at the quality of stillness in the young man's posture, that was not the stillness of someone afraid to move first. "You are Skywalker," Dooku said. Not a question. "Yes, I know your master." He drew his lightsaber with the fluid ease of someone for whom the motion is so practiced it has become involuntary. The curved hilt, the red blade elegant in the specific way that Makashi produces elegance, optimized, minimal, aristocratic in its confidence that nothing coming at it will require more than precise economical response. He was a significant figure once. He could have been something remarkable had he chosen his affiliations with more wisdom. He chose them fine, Anakin said. He chose isolation, independence. Dooku's blade described a small, precise arc, the opening of Makashi form, the greeting a master gives an opponent he's already categorized. Power requires architecture. Architecture requires hierarchy. Your master understands force, but refuses the framework that makes force mean something. It is a philosopher's vanity. Anakin ignited both blades. Dooku's eyes moved to the second saber, a fractional pause, not concern, recalibration. Makashi was designed for single-opponent, single-blade engagements. It was precise, linear, optimized to defeat the predictable arc of one aggressive blade through footwork and minimum effort. 2 blades from a single opponent with the stance to use them was a variable the form acknowledged but had to adjust for. Dooku adjusted. His footwork opened by a quarter step. He attacked. The first exchange was Dooku's. Pure Makashi, perfectly executed. A feint high that produced a response and an immediate exploitation of the response's commitment. A riposte to the center that Anakin redirected rather than blocked, and still caught a glancing touch on the left shoulder that would have been a wound from a real blade. Dooku reset without expression. He had read the redirect. He was already updating. The second exchange was longer. Dooku's Makashi worked in straight lines, blade to body, each movement derived from the previous one through precise logical extension. It was a form built on the assumption that an opponent could be read and that reading an opponent was sufficient to defeat them. Against a single aggressive blade, this was usually correct. Against 2 blades operating in the conversation Revan had described on the Tython Plateau, one asking, one waiting for the answer, it produced a different problem. Dooku answered the question the right blade asked, and the left blade was already somewhere he hadn't allocated a response to. He turned it. Not cleanly. His footwork widened. He shifted into a modified Soresu integration, the defensive adjunct that Makashi's most experienced practitioners grafted onto the form when it ran into something its base assumptions couldn't resolve. A concession. Small, technical, invisible to anyone who didn't know what it meant. Anakin knew what it meant. He had spent 3 years learning to read exactly this kind of structural language in an opponent's movement. The third exchange was his. He drove Dooku back toward the storage tower's wall, not with raw aggression, but with a sustained dual-channel pressure that kept presenting the same problem from 2 angles simultaneously. one blade channeling the Vapad-adjacent intensity that had always been native to him, the other maintaining the precision line that kept Makashi's elegant ripostes from having a clean target to answer. Dooku's footwork tightened. He was running out of lateral space, and the wall was 10 meters away, and the adjustment required to address the left blade was creating a gap in his response to the right. He was very good. He managed it for 4 more exchanges. Then the gap opened, and Anakin's right blade went through it, and Dooku's saber was on the ground. Anakin's left blade stopped 6 centimeters from Dooku's throat. Dooku was still. His breathing was controlled. His expression had passed through surprise and arrived somewhere that was close to, but not quite, respect. "Kill me," he said. "You have grounds." Anakin looked at him over the blade. His own breathing was elevated, and he could feel that clearly. Not spiking. Present. "No," he said. "Mercy." Dooku said the word with precision. Or hesitation. Neither. Anakin held the blade exactly where it was. "You're more useful to the Republic alive and answering questions than dead and unavailable." A pause. "And discipline is not the absence of feeling. It is the shape you give it." Dooku's eyes moved between the blade and the young man behind it. Something shifted in them that had no clean name. Binders from a Mandalorian unit that had come up behind him closed around his wrists. The battle group, without Dooku's command presence, took 40 minutes to fully disengage. Some surrendered, the rest retreated to orbit and jumped. The civilian casualties from the ground assault were 31. Every evacuation route was cleared before the fighting ended. In the city center's main plaza, the tactical command post was being dismantled by a vanguard unit, while Revan stood with his hands behind his back and watched the sunrise come over the administrative building's roof. He had been still since the resonance released. The transition back was something Anakin still didn't fully understand. Not exhaustion exactly, but a quality of returning from somewhere the body hadn't gone. "Clean," Revan said when Anakin reached him. "He said you could have been something remarkable," Anakin said, "if you'd chosen better affiliations." He would. Revan looked east toward the storage towers. "What did you tell him?" "That you chose. Fine." A long pause. "Yes," Revan said. "We did." On Coruscant, 6 hours later, the HoloNet broadcast showed Dooku in Republic custody. In the Senate gallery, a ripple moved through the assembled delegates. Surprise, relief, the specific excitement of people watching the war's shape change, without understanding yet what had changed it. In his private office, Palpatine watched the broadcast. His hands were folded on the desk. His face was still. He sat that way for a long time, alone, while outside his window Coruscant continued its business with the indifferent momentum of a city that did not yet know what the capture meant. Inside the office, in the silence that was his alone, he began to count what he had left. The Sith archive beneath the Senate building is not in any Republic record. It exists in the sub-basement infrastructure that official schematics attribute to power relay stations and climate control equipment for the floors above. The entrance requires 3 biometric confirmations that are not Palpatine's public credentials, and a force-sealed door mechanism that predates the building itself, installed by a Sith Lord 2 generations before Plagueis, during a period when the Senate building's foundation was being expanded, and the work crew responsible for this particular sublevel did not survive to file their contractor reports. The chamber beyond is small, practical, a single curved shelf of holocrons, a reading console, a meditation space that doubles as a ritual circle, the geometric inlay in the floor an old design, pre-Rule of Two, from an era when Sith ritual had not yet been refined into the efficiency doctrine that Bane produced and Plagueis perfected. The air is recycled and cold. No windows. No ambient sound from the city above. Palpatine came here when he needed to think without the Senate building's perpetual audience. He had not needed it this often in 20 years. The count he had begun in his office the night of Dooku's capture, he now laid out with precision, in the way he laid out all problems. Sequentially, without sentiment, each element assessed as a variable rather than a loss. Dooku, gone. Not dead, which was the more manageable outcome. Dead. His secrets ended with him. Alive in Republic custody, with Revan's people controlling the interrogation parameters, his knowledge of the Sith's political architecture was an open wound that had not yet begun to bleed but would. The clone army, the chips. He had sent Sly Moore's network to Kamino 6 days after his own first suspicion, not in response to confirmed intelligence, but in response to the feeling, reliable as a diagnostic instrument after 40 years of practice, that something had been moved in a room he thought he controlled. The Camino audit had returned 2 weeks ago with a technical report he had read 3 times, each time arriving at the same conclusion. The partition was intact. The command sequence was intact. The targeting protocol registered as functional. Everything the audit could measure looked exactly as designed, which meant either the chips were fine or someone had altered them in a way that registered as fine. Those were the only 2 options. He had spent a week determining which one he was in, and arrived at the answer through a logic he trusted more than any audit instrument. Revan had been to Camino. The timing was documentable if you had access to the right port records, which he did. Revan had been to Camino, and the chips had not been touched, and that combination of facts was not possible. He crossed Order 66 off the count, the apprentice pipeline. He examined it last because it was the loss that required the most honesty. The Skywalker boy should have come to him by now, should have been sitting across that private table with the particular hunger of a young man who had been told his entire life that what he loved was a weakness, and who had found in the Chancellor's warm regard the first voice that told him otherwise. The hunger was the lever. The lever required the hunger. He had a mother in a safe house on Naboo. He had a master who had apparently surgically removed every psychological mechanism that Palpatine's approach depended on, with the precision of someone who had read the approach in advance, which he had now accepted was exactly what had happened. Revan had lived the approach from the inside. He had been the approach's most successful product, 4 millennia ago, before he had the specific inconvenience of returning from it. You could not tempt a man back into a room he had already mapped, escaped, and then spent years teaching others to recognize. Palpatine sat in the cold of the archive and finished the count. No apprentice, no army failsafe, no general, no manufactured war narrative. The third faction's public documentation of the conflict's constructed nature had been circulating in the Senate for 2 months, and while it had not yet produced the institutional response it eventually would, the momentum of it was not reversible. He had watched the war's public legitimacy erode with the specific helplessness of a man watching something he built from the inside be disassembled from the outside by people who understood its architecture. He opened his eyes. The ritual circle in the floor's geometric inlay caught the chamber's low light in its carved channels. He looked at it for a long time. There were Sith practices that the rule of 2 had not eliminated so much as set aside. Techniques from an earlier era, before Bane's Reformation, when the Sith Order had been large enough and public enough that subtlety was a secondary consideration to raw demonstrative power. Plagueis had catalogued them, had considered some of them, in theoretical terms, as options of last resort, had explained to his apprentice during those early years of instruction why last resort options required precise accounting of what resort meant. Last resort meant nothing else remains. Palpatine had arrived at nothing else remaining. The ritual he constructed over the following hours drew from 3 separate holocron sources, a pre-Bane dark side amplification technique associated with a Sith Lord, whose name had been removed from most records for reasons the records did not explain, a pain-sustained endurance methodology from the era of the old Sith Wars, and his own decades of refined Force lightning work, which had always been his most purely destructive capability. The combination was not elegant. Plagueis would have found it inelegant. Bane would have found it a philosophical failure. Neither of them was available for comment. What the combination produced, when he began it at midnight, was a sustained dark side invocation of a scale the Senate building had not hosted since its foundation. Coruscant felt it before it understood what it was feeling. The upper atmosphere above the Senate district developed a weather pattern that the meteorological networks flagged as anomalous and could not attribute to any known pressure system. A slow spiral of cloud formation, drawing inward rather than dispersing. The underside of it lit by something that the sensor networks interpreted as electromagnetic discharge, and the city's population interpreted as their windows reflecting light from somewhere above. The lower levels felt it as pressure. Not atmospheric, the kind of pressure that has no physical instrument to measure it. That manifests as animals in the sublevels going silent and infants in the residential blocks waking simultaneously, and the particular quality of unease that moves through large populations the way a signal moves through a receiver without a sender anyone can identify. The temple alarms in the Jedi Temple went active at 0130. Not the perimeter alarms, the internal ones. The deep resonance detectors that the temple's ancient founders had installed to register large-scale force disruptions in the surrounding area, that had not triggered in living Jedi memory, that most of the current Order's members had no training for, because there was no training for them because nothing had required it. Mace Windu was in the council chamber within 4 minutes. He stood at the window and looked at the spiral in the clouds above the Senate district, and felt what was moving beneath it the way you feel a vibration through stone. Not through any single sense, but through the aggregate of all of them, registering the same wrong thing simultaneously. He reached for his comm. Anakin felt it in his sleep, not as a sound or a visual, as a temperature drop that had nothing to do with the room's climate control. A cold that moved through him and kept moving, past the physical register, into something that had no anatomical location but was unmistakably present. He was on his feet before he was fully awake, both hilts in his hands by instinct, standing in the center of the room in the dark with his awareness extending outward, and finding the shape of what was happening above the city. He found it in under 3 seconds. He was dressed and in the corridor in under 10. Revan was already outside his door. The mask was in place, the armor was on. He had been awake, Anakin understood, not because the disturbance had woken him, but because he had felt it building for longer than the point at which it became undeniable, had sat with the knowledge of what it was and what it meant, and had made several decisions in the time it took the city's instruments to register that anything was happening. He has nothing left, Anakin said. No, so he's doing this instead. When a man with Sidious's capability arrives at nothing else remaining, Revan said, he stops trying to win the way he planned to win. He tries to ensure that if he cannot have the outcome he designed, the alternative outcome costs enough that it was not worth pursuing. He looked toward the window at the end of the corridor, where the sky above the Senate district was doing something that sky was not meant to do. He is not trying to win now. He is trying to make winning unacceptable to us. Anakin looked at the window. The cloud spiral was visible even from here, lit from beneath by something that pulsed at irregular intervals. Not lightning. Something that lightning was the crude physical cousin of. He'll kill people, Anakin said. Yes. How many? As many as it takes to produce a Senate vote that grants him emergency powers sufficient to... Revan stopped. It does not matter. We are not letting it reach the vote. Anakin looked at him. The Jedi will move for the Senate building, Revan said. Mace Windu is already on his way. He will arrive with sufficient force to contain the outer perimeter of the disruption, and insufficient understanding of what he is containing to end it. A pause. We end it. The spiral above the Senate district pulsed again. The window glass vibrated at a frequency just below audible. Anakin felt the cold move through him a second time. He did not flinch from it. He named it the way he had been taught, named it clearly, held it at the distance where it was information rather than instruction, and set it down. His mother was on Naboo. She was safe. That was a fact and not a fear, and the difference between those two things was everything. Then we end it, he said. They moved toward the door together, into the corridor toward the lift, toward the city outside and the sky above it, doing what a sky only does when something very old and very dangerous has decided that subtlety has run its course. Behind them, in the archive beneath the Senate building, Palpatine's ritual circle burned cold blue in the dark, and the man at its center had closed his eyes, and what moved through him had no temperature and no mercy, and had been waiting a very long time for permission to be used without restraint. He gave it permission, the sky above Coruscant answered. The Senate building's sub-basement access requires 3 biometric confirmations. Revan walked through the door before it finished asking for the first one. The force-sealed mechanism that had held for 2 generations of Sith tenancy came apart under his attention the way the council chamber doors had come apart 4 years ago. Not forced, not broken. Simply moved aside by something that found the concept of resistance from a lock genuinely beneath acknowledgement. The durasteel peeled back. The corridor beyond was dark and cold and smelled of ozone, and something older than ozone, a burnt metal quality that had no clean chemical explanation, and that Anakin's body registered as threat before his mind finished processing the sensory information. They went down. The sounds of the city disappeared first, the ambient traffic, the distant alarm networks, the collective mechanical hum of a planet city that never fully sleeps. Then the building's own systems faded, the climate processors and power relay hum absorbed by the thickness of the sublevel walls. What replaced them was the sound of the ritual itself, which was not a sound in the conventional sense, but a pressure that the inner ear translated as sound because it had no other instrument to use. A low, sustained resonance, felt more in the chest than heard. That pulsed at irregular intervals and made the air in the corridor feel like something that had been used and not replaced. The geometric inlay in the ritual chamber's floor was no longer cold stone. It burned. Not with flame, with dark side energy given physical expression. The carved channels filled with a light that was the color of nothing natural, that illuminated the chamber without warming it. that threw shadows in directions that the light source's position did not account for. The holocrons on the curved shelf vibrated in their casings. The meditation console had cracked down its center, the stones splitting under the sustained energetic pressure of what had been building here for hours. Palpatine stood at the circle's center. He was not the Chancellor. The Chancellor was a performance, a sustained, practiced, decades-long act of patience and political craft, and the specific kind of intelligence that operates most effectively when no one suspects it is operating. What stood in the circle was what the performance had been built to contain. Older than the office, older than the Republic's memory of him. The face that the ritual had drawn to the surface by degrees. The yellow eyes fully present now. The skin carrying the specific quality of something preserved past its natural duration by an act of sustained will. Darth Sidious. He looked at them across the burning circle, and the expression on his face was not rage. Rage would have been manageable. What was there instead was the cold total focus of a man who has simplified his situation down to its final terms, and found the simplicity clarifying. "I wondered which of you would come," he said. His voice had shed the Chancellor's warm register entirely. What was underneath was older and flatter, and carried the specific quality of something that had not needed to perform for a very long time. "I had hoped for both." "Then we've obliged you," Revan said. Sidious came out of the circle fast. Not the gradual escalation of a man conserving energy, the full-speed commitment of someone who has been building toward a single expenditure and has decided the moment is now. Force lightning from both hands, the full output of decades of refined technique. Not the controlled lances he used in political demonstrations, but something wider and less structured, the kind of discharge that the rule of two reserved for situations where precision was a secondary consideration to saturation. Revan raised one hand. The lightning hit his palm and stopped. Not deflected, stopped. The energy met his hand and compressed there, held against the surface of his skin in a sustained crackling mass that should have been traveling through him and was not. Absorbed, contained, drawn into him the way a drain receives water. The Tutamini's principle demonstrated now at a scale and duration that its theoretical descriptions had never fully accounted for. The technique was ancient, documented in texts that predated the Jedi Temple on Coruscant, requiring not just knowledge of the method, but a depth of force integration that most practitioners could approach only asymptotically across a lifetime of practice. Revan held it for 3 seconds. The lightning did not penetrate. He pulled it back. The expression on Sidious's face shifted by a fraction. Not surprise. Revision. Ancient technique, he said. "You've never seen it at this application," Revan said. "You've never seen anyone who could sustain the draw long enough for it to matter. Until now. Until now." Sidious's eyes moved to Anakin. The revision in his expression became something more precise. An assessment, rapid and professional, the same quality Anakin had felt in the private reception room 4 years ago. The hand looking for stones that shifted. The hand found nothing that shifted. What it found was a young man standing with 2 sabers unlit at his sides, and an expression that was not hatred, not righteous fury, not the hot-eyed resolve of someone who has been building toward this moment as a personal reckoning. What it found was something that Sidious's entire methodology had no category for. Someone who was simply, completely, and without internal conflict here to do a job that needed doing. The leverage was gone. All of it. Every hook, every gap, every reservoir of suppressed fear and secret love and unexamined rage that 40 years of patient cultivation had taught him to find and use. Revan had not merely protected the boy from him, Revan had removed the conditions that made protecting the boy from him necessary, had built something in the place those conditions would have occupied that needed no protection because it had no gap to exploit. For the first time in 4 decades, Darth Sidious faced someone who had nothing he could use. He attacked Anakin anyway. The 2-on-1 structure that followed had no theatrical elegance. It was not meant to. Sidious was genuinely dangerous. Not a politician who had learned a dangerous hobby, but a practitioner of 60 years whose application of dark side power was as refined as anything in the living galaxy. His lightsaber technique was not a single form. It drew from every form, recombining them in the specific way that masters who have absorbed the theory beneath the technique can recombine them, producing something adaptive and unreadable in the short term. Anakin read it in the medium term. He stayed in motion, keeping Sidious's attention divided between 2 threat vectors, not coordinating with Revan through spoken communication, but through the same quality of shared awareness that the Force resonance produced at scale. Reduced here to 2 people and 1 opponent, and the simple understanding of each other's spatial logic built through years of training in the same philosophy, under the same teacher, on the same unstable ground. Sidious drove at Revan with a sustained force push, not the targeted variety, but a directional wave intended to clear space. Revan absorbed it through his stance, redirected a portion of it, and the energy that came back was not the same energy that had gone out. Sidious turned to answer Anakin. Anakin was not where the turn expected him. The exchange lasted 7 minutes. Longer than it should have, in the abstract calculus of 2 trained Force users against 1. But Sidious had 60 years of survival against opponents who wanted him dead. And survival in those conditions produces a specific kind of combat intelligence that raw power and disciplined technique have to work against incrementally rather than decisively. They worked against it incrementally. The 7th minute ended when Revan stepped back, not because he was spent, not because the engagement had pushed him to a limit. He stepped back with the deliberateness of a decision made in advance, creating space, removing himself from Sidious's immediate threat calculus. And in the half-second that Sidious's awareness reorganized around the new geometry, Anakin's right blade found the lightsaber hilt in his hand and removed it with a precision that left no room for a response. Sidious stood disarmed. He raised both hands for the lightning. Anakin's left blade was already there, not at his throat, not theatrical, positioned at the precise point where the gesture's completion became impossible. A surgical placement. The blade that asked questions, asking one final one. Sidious looked at him. The yellow eyes moved across Anakin's face with the last operational instinct of a man who has built a career on finding what people need and supplying it in forms that served him. He was still looking, still processing, still trying to find the gap. "You could take everything," Sidious said. "Quiet now. The performance entirely gone. Everything I have built. Every structure, every contingency, every instrument of power that this republic has been arranged around. All of it transfers. There is no other heir. I have made certain of that. You end me here, and you inherit nothing. You end me here, and a vacuum opens that will consume everything I have spent a century constructing, and you will spend the rest of your life trying to prevent the collapse." Anakin looked at him. "Or," Sidious continued, "you take the chair." A pause. "No," Anakin said. "The vacuum will be filled by the people the Republic was built to serve." His voice carried no heat. "That is not my problem to solve by becoming you." The yellow eyes held his for a long moment. Then Revan's voice from behind Anakin, quiet and without inflection. "Let it end." Anakin looked at Sidious across the blade. He thought about the bridge, the 14th crossing, the way a thing's flaws were not separate from the thing but part of how the thing was, and the understanding that followed from that, which was that broken things could be learned, and learned things could be worked with, and worked with things eventually stopped being obstacles and became something you had simply passed through. He thought about his mother's hands, the specific weight of them, no reservoir of secret terror, no suppressed grief waiting to be leveraged, no fear that love had been hiding from. Just the simple, solid fact of her, alive on Naboo, safe, existing in a world that was about to be measurably better than the one it had been an hour ago. The blade moved, clean, precise, without hesitation and without darkness and without the cost that this act had carried in every other version of this moment that the Force had ever presented to the galaxy. Darth Sidious fell. The ritual circle's light went out simultaneously, the dark side energy that had been sustaining it releasing all at once, dispersing upward through the building's foundation in a wave that every Force-sensitive in Coruscant felt as a sudden, absolute silence where there had been noise so sustained they had stopped hearing it as noise. Above the Senate district, the cloud spiral unwound. Anakin stood in the dark of the archive with both blades still lit, illuminating the cracked floor and the empty shelf and the space where the thing at the center of the last 50 years of galactic history had been. The cold was gone. He deactivated both blades. The dark was just dark now, ordinary and complete and entirely without malice. The dark of a room with no windows, meaning nothing, threatening nothing, asking nothing of anyone standing in it. He breathed. Beside him, Revan stood still in the way he had stood still on the Leon beach, the way he had stood still in the council chamber, the way he had stood still at every point in 4 years where the moment required presence rather than action. Present, complete, without the quality of a man waiting for the next thing. The archive's recycled air moved through the room. That was all. The Senate chamber holds 1,244 delegates when every seat is filled. It was filled now. The session had been called without the standard 72-hour notice provision. Emergency protocol invoked by the acting speaker in the absence of a chancellor whose absence was itself the subject of the session. The delegates had come anyway, some still in transit clothes, some having crossed 3 hyperspace jumps in under a day. They came because the HoloNet had spent 48 hours broadcasting a specific combination of images. Dooku in Republic custody, the cloud spiral over the Senate district unwinding in real time, and the archive beneath the building open to a joint Jedi-Senate inspection team that had spent 2 days cataloging what was inside it. And the combination of those images produced in people the specific urgency of needing to be present for what came next. Senator Bail Organa presented the findings. He had been awake for 31 hours, and it showed in the precise economy of his delivery. No rhetorical flourish, no performed outrage, the flat sequential architecture of a man who has decided that the facts are sufficient and anything he adds to them will only diminish them. He laid out the manufactured war, the clone chips, the Sith archive, the political framework Palpatine had constructed across 2 decades of Senate manipulation. He laid it out item by item, each one sourced, each one documented, the evidence chains unambiguous. The chamber was very quiet, not the quiet of shock, the quiet of a large group of people revising their understanding of a period of time they had lived through and thought they understood. The specific interior silence of revision. The vote to end the war came 4 hours later, not unanimous. Nothing in the Senate was ever unanimous. There were always delegates whose political circumstances made even the obvious position complicated. But the margin was not close. The separatist leadership, stripped of Dooku and deprived of Sidious's shadow coordination, had sent a negotiating delegation to Coruscant within 18 hours of the archive's exposure. They had read the same evidence the Senate read. Several of them had not known they were instruments of a manufactured conflict. Several of them had known and calculated that the moment to stop knowing was now. The war ended not with a ceremony, but with a signed document and a vote count, and the specific administrative anticlimactic quality of large-scale violence being formally reclassified, as concluded. The Jedi Council requested an audience on the 3rd day. They convened not in the High Council chamber, but in the lower meeting room, a choice Anakin noticed and understood as deliberate. The chamber at the tower's peak was the room of authority and judgment. This room was the room of conversation. Yoda and Mace Windu sat across a table from Revan and Anakin, without the circle of 12 seats, and without the elevated positioning that the council chamber's architecture provided. Yoda looked older. Not physically, he had looked the same age since records existed of him, and would presumably look the same age until he didn't, older in a different sense. The weight behind his eyes had shifted its quality, from the weight of sustained vigilance to the weight of a man who has finished examining something and arrived at a conclusion he finds uncomfortable and accurate, simultaneously. Failed him, we did, Yoda said. He was not looking at Anakin when he said it. He was looking at the table. Failed the Order, failed the Republic. A pause. No, this we did not. That is not absolution, only description. Mace Windu's hands were flat on the table. His jaw held the set of a man who has rehearsed something and is now determining whether the rehearsed version is the honest one. We came to offer formal recognition, he said, of your service, of what you built. He looked at Revan, and to extend an invitation. The Order needs rebuilding, it needs. He stopped, found the word without performance. Correction. You understand what we failed to understand. We are asking you to help us learn it. He looked at Anakin then. Both of you, he said, as members of this Order, with whatever rank and authority you require. The room was quiet. Anakin looked at Revan. Revan's hands rested on the table in the same posture he used when he was not performing consideration, because the consideration was already complete. No, Revan said. Mace's expression held. No. Not as members, not with rank, not with authority derived from institutional position. He looked at Yoda. You already know why. An Order rebuilt around the people who corrected it produces hero worship dressed as doctrine. The correction needs to be structural, not personal. New training philosophy. New position on attachment, new understanding of what the Force asks of a practitioner, integrated, not suppressed. A pause. We will advise, we will teach, when asked. We will not lead it. The Order needs to lead itself, differently, not follow 2 more people who know better. Yoda's eyes closed, opened. Wisdom, he said. The single word carrying more weight than it usually carried in that formulation. Not deployed as affirmation of something he already agreed with, but as something learned. Mace looked at Anakin. A long look, the measuring quality from the High Council chamber 4 years ago, but different now in its content. Not assessing threat or categorizing potential. Something closer to honest reckoning. You were 9 years old, Mace said, standing on that floor. Yes, Anakin said. We were wrong. Anakin looked at him. Yes, he said again. No heat in it, No residual wound performing itself. Just the clean acknowledgement of something that was true, that had mattered, that had been corrected by events, and that did not require more resonance than that. Mace nodded once. The nod of a man receiving something he had expected to be harder to receive, and finding it was the receiving that was difficult, not the thing itself. The apartment was on the residential levels of the civilian district, 40 floors above the public gardens, with a balcony that looked south toward the Senate district, and, on clear days, caught the light off the dome clusters well enough that the whole city seemed briefly to have been designed for the view. Padmé had been living here for 2 years, since relocating her senatorial offices to Coruscant full-time, after the Outer Rim humanitarian operations had brought her into the Vanguard's adjacent political work. She and Anakin had met properly 18 months ago, in the way that people who have been occupying adjacent spaces finally meet, not as a dramatic collision, but as an arrival at something that had been accumulating without announcement. They stood on the balcony now in the early evening light, the city doing what it did at this hour, with the last of the day in it. She was not surprised when he told her what had happened in the archive. She had been awake when the cloud spiral appeared. She had watched it dissolve from this balcony, and had known, in the way she had learned to know things adjacent to Anakin's world, what the dissolving meant. What she had not expected was what he said next. "I want to stop keeping things separate," he said. "You and the work and the rest of it." He looked at her directly, the quality of attention she had come to understand, as the way he looked at things he was not managing the impression of. "I was taught that love declared is love disciplined. That hiding it doesn't make it real. It makes it fragile." She looked at him. "So I'm not hiding it," he said. "I don't want to." Below them, the city moved through its evening patterns. Transport streams, light sequences, the accumulated ordinary business of a civilization that had not ended, that had been given a specific narrow chance not to end, that would continue now in the direction of something better than what it had nearly become. She took his hand, no ceremony, no audience, no architecture of secrecy requiring them to mean something other than what they meant. Just that. His hand in hers, in the evening light, in the open air of a city that could see them and was welcome to. Revan came to him on the 7th morning after the archive. He came to the balcony while the city was still in early light, before the day's noise had fully built, and he stood with his hands behind his back, looking at the horizon in the way he had stood on the Leon beach, 8 years ago, present with the history of a place that no one else in the vicinity could feel. Anakin stood beside him. He had known for 3 days that this was coming, not because anything had been said, because of a quality that had entered Revan's stillness, a completeness to it that had not been there before the archive, the kind of completeness that had a direction. "Your purpose here," Anakin said, "is complete," Revan said. The words sat between them with the specific weight of something that is true and does not need argument. "Bastila," Anakin said. "Waited long enough," Revan said. Something moved in his voice that had no equivalent in the register he used for instruction or strategy or assessment. Something that had been held a long time under those registers and did not now need to be held any longer. The morning light came over the southern dome clusters. Revan reached to his face. His hands found the mask's edges, the iron-colored faceplate, shaped like judgment, older than the order that had tried to turn Anakin away. He held it for a moment, then he held it out. Anakin took it. The weight of it was significant. Not physically. The physical weight was manageable. The other weight. The weight of what it had been present for. The accumulated specific gravity of a thing that has been carried through more history than most civilizations accumulate. "Discipline is not the absence of feeling," Revan said. The line in its final form spoken without the framing of instruction. Not teaching it now, stating it for the last time as simple fact. "It is the shape you give it," Anakin said. Revan looked at him. Then he was gone. Not dramatically, not a flash or a sound or a physical departure that the narrative could describe. He was there, and then the quality of presence that had occupied the space beside Anakin resolved itself into ordinary air, ordinary morning light, the city continuing below, and the balcony holding only one person. Anakin stood with the mask in his hands. He looked at it for a long time. Then he looked up, at the city, at the sky above the city going from early gold to the full blue of mid-morning, at the life below moving through itself with the ordinary momentum of people who did not know how close the shape of their world had come to being permanently different. He set the mask on the balcony's edge. He breathed. Behind him, through the open door, he could hear Padmé moving through the apartment, the small, specific sounds of a morning beginning, of ordinary life doing what ordinary life does in the absence of anything trying to end it. He listened to that for a while. Then he went inside, In the years that followed, the Jedi Order rebuilt itself slowly and without spectacle. The new training philosophy entered the curriculum without a name attached to it, which was, most agreed, exactly right. The clone soldiers were discharged with full Republic citizenship and settled across 100 systems that were grateful for the people, if not the circumstances, that had produced them. The war's manufactured origins were taught in Republic schools within a generation. The academy that eventually opened on Tython was small at first, 8 students, no ranks, no hierarchy of titles, no doctrine of suppression. It grew. On Naboo, Shmi Skywalker tended a garden that overlooked the lake country. She was visited often. The mask of Revan was kept in the academy's entrance hall, not displayed, placed, set on a plain stone shelf at eye level, where students passed it every day, where it could be looked at directly. Nobody who looked at it directly looked away quickly. They stayed with it a moment. Whatever they found there, they carried with them into the practice rooms and the training grounds, and the long work of becoming something the galaxy needed. That was enough. That was, in the end, exactly enough. Let us know what you'd like to see next. The end.